In the past few decades, there has been a great decline in the moral climate. There are few people who doubt the decline in the moral climate. We see evidences of it here. The lack of civility in discussions among people. The resort to chants instead of arguments. These are all evidences on one level of a decline in moral climate. But we see it also in the rising crime statistics, in the lack of respect for property, in the kind of rioting that broke out in New York after the blackout, in the problems of maintaining discipline in elementary schools. Why? Why have we had such a decline in moral climate? I submit to you that a major factor has been because of a change in the philosophies which have been prominent in society from a belief in individual responsibility to a supposed belief in social responsibility, from a tendency to get away from the individual, from his responsibility for his own life and his own behavior. If he doesn't behave properly, that's his responsibility and he's to be charged with it, to a belief that after all it's society that is responsible. If you adopt the view that everything belongs to society, then it belongs to nobody. Why should I have any respect for property if it belongs to everybody? If you adopt the view that no man is responsible for his own behavior because somehow or other society is responsible, well then, why should he seek to make his behavior good? Now, of course, don't misunderstand me. On a scientific level, it's true that what we are is affected a great deal by the society in which we live and grow up. Of course. All of us are different than we would have been if we had grown up in a different society. So I'm not denying in the slightest the effect on all of us of the social institutions within which we operate, both on our values and on our opportunities. But I am only saying that a set of social institutions which stresses individual responsibility, which stresses the responsibility of the individual, given the kind of person he is, the kind of society in which he operates, to be responsible for himself, is a kind of a society which is likely to have a much higher and more responsible moral climate than the kind of a society in which you stress the lack of responsibility of the individual for what happens to him. Let me note the schizophrenia in the talk about social responsibility. There's always a tendency to excuse the people who are harmed by what happens or the people who are regarded as the victims. There's always a tendency to excuse them from any responsibility. They didn't riot in Harlem because they had no control over their emotions, because they were bad people or because they were irresponsible people. No. They rioted because of what society did to them. That's the argument. But nobody ever turns it around and argues the other way. If the people who rioted are innocent of guilt because society who did it to them, then aren't the people who are singled out as the oppressors also free of guilt? Do you hear these same people say, oh no, we mustn't blame those bad people who trample the poor under their feet because they're not doing it out of their own individual will. Society is forcing them to do it. If you're going to use the doctrine of social responsibility, you ought to be even-handed both ways. It excuses both the victim and the person who I can't say responsible because that would be inconsistent, the person who is alleged to be responsible for the victimization. And similarly, you must be even-handed on both sides. We must, all of us, be individually responsible for what we do to our fellow men, whether that be harm or good.